talking about reasonable accommodations. If you don't mind, let me add reasonable modifications because there's just a couple of important things here that you need to know. Interestingly enough, when you're talking about disability status, it's not always as bad as what landlords perceive that it is. And here's why. Remember, reasonable modification means you are changing a structure to accommodate the disabled person. But interestingly enough, it's done at the tenant's expense. So let's take a look at a scenario here. And don't worry about writing down the scenario. Just walk through the scenario with me. You're a relatively new investor. You only have a few properties. And you bought some older properties because you were able to get a good deal on them, fix them up, blah, 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 whatever. Okay? Wouldn't you know it, one of the first potential tenants that comes to you is someone that comes in a wheelchair. Now, you really didn't design the houses or repair the houses, renovate the houses to accommodate a wheelchair. So someone comes to you. Let's talk about right answers versus wrong answers. Here's the wrong answer. The person in the wheelchair asks you, hey, I like your house, I like its location, I'd like to lease it. This is the wrong answer. Well, I'm sorry, we're not wheelchair accessible, but good luck, okay? Now, would you say that you just limited the market for that person in the wheelchair? You know what you could say? What do they need? Someone in a wheelchair and it has a high porch, what do they need? Clearly they need a ramp or a lift. You're going to say, I would be glad to accommodate that. Are you willing to pay for the ramp? Are you willing to pay for the lift? Okay? Because I can impute this back to the tenant. The landlord has to allow it at the tenant's expense, assuming that it's reasonable. I believe that a wheelchair ramp is clearly reasonable. Okay? Let me tell you a little bit about this guy. This tenant is a large man. Have you ever seen the large guy wheelchairs? They're big. Have you ever seen a house built in the 1970s? Their doors are narrow. Okay? So he says, well, I don't have a problem getting in here. I'm permanently confined to this wheelchair. And so what are we going to need to do? Widening the door. Is that a reasonable accommodation? What's my favorite answer in real estate? It depends. It depends. Here comes the question. Widening that door, would that affect the load-bearing capabilities of the house? Because if it did, it's not a reasonable modification, right? But assuming it can be done reasonably without affecting the future use of the house, I'm going to say, sure, I'll be glad to allow it at your expense. Okay, so now he widens the door. But remember, this guy is permanently in this wheelchair. Okay? You can say doors as necessary. As necessary. This person goes into the kitchen. Now, what problem, permanently confined to a wheelchair, what problem is he going to have in the kitchen? Countertops and sink, cabinets. Okay? Now, how about this for a reasonable modification? Do you think it's reasonable to lower those countertops, lower those cabinets so that he can reach them? Why not? It's a lot. It's a lot. Well, now remember, if he doesn't want to pay, that's a different story. But assuming he says, yeah, I'll be glad to pay for all the renovations. Is that a reasonable modification? Hold that thought. Hold that thought. You guys got to stop living inside my head. Don't jump ahead. I'll start talking faster to get to those points. Reasonable modification to lower the countertops and the cabinets. So far, if he's willing to pay for it, that's a reasonable modification. Now, here's what all of you have started projecting toward. He's going to leave at some point, right? And it's my house. So let's talk about what's reasonable when he leaves. Would it be reasonable for me to require him to take down that wheelchair ramp?
Yes.
No, not really. It doesn't affect the usability of the house. Now, having said that, I can take it down or not, but we're probably not going to be able to make him take it down. Okay. How about that widened front door? Anybody can use a widened front door, right? So no help on that at all, right? But now let's go into that kitchen. Now let's go in that kitchen. Do you think it's reasonable to require the tenant to put it back in its original condition?
Yes.
I think that's reasonable. you know, the fact of the matter is we're talking about reasonable modifications. If it were left in that condition, it might limit the people I could rent it to in the future, right? So do you think he should pay to put it back? What problem do you foresee? What's that? Better put it in writing. Clearly you'll do that. But you know what right the landlord actually has? If I end up having to do that level of modification that could affect the future use of the house, I can collect a deposit, put it into a trust account that's to be used for that purpose when the tenant moves out. So this is what I say, it's not as bad as landlords perceive it is. Is it an inconvenience? Yeah, it is a convenience. Probably not as inconvenient as being permanently confined to a wheelchair, but having said that, yes, it could be. But it's a reasonable modification. The point it gets beyond reasonable, the landlord would not be obligated to perform that particular thing, okay? So it's important for landlords to know what their rights are. Interestingly enough, as an agent, I want you to be aware of all of this stuff. But remember, we have resources. If they need professional guidance on this, we can give them phone numbers that they can call and find out. I had she's a friend, and she became a friend while she was a student, and now she's an agent. She had an interesting dilemma that she had to deal with. She has a beach property, okay? And her beach property, she markets it as being, she markets it as being hypoallergenic, okay? So she has it cleaned in a certain way to make sure that people with allergies can stay there and not be affected. I mean, this is part of her marketing plan. She has a person that's come to her for 3 years running, all right? So she signs an agreement with this person. They're coming several months out. The month before this woman comes, she calls her up and says, my granddaughter's going to be coming with me. My granddaughter has a comfort animal. Okay? Now I want you to think about this. She markets her property for people who have a disability to an extent with the allergies, right? Now she has someone else that's going to show up in this property that has an animal and must be accommodated. So she's in a dilemma. You know, whose needs do I put over someone else's? So I told her, I said, this is over my head. You can call and get some advice on about this. As it turns out, the woman that had been coming there for years, actually, she kind of understood the dilemma. And the reason she had rented it in the past was because she did have a family member that needed to be hydrated. Now she's actually asking for something completely opposite of what she always wanted. So she actually wrote in it, and she said, do you know any of your friends that have a similar property? And obviously she did. They were right there in the same complex. So they were able to work this out without it ever going to a federal case or anything like that. But she was literally nervous because, you know, which one has the greater weight? Which one has the greater need? They're professionals you can call to get guidance on this. Don't panic if this comes up. Be aware. Don't panic. Okay? Reasonable accommodations versus reasonable modification. You got that if it comes up? And then let me ask you this question just real quickly. If you are a landlord and you have a no pet policy and someone shows up with a comfort animal and they have a doctor's note if necessary, are you going to allow that animal even though you have a no pet policy? Yes. Are you going to charge them a pet fee? No, because it's not a pet. It's not a pet. It's a comfort animal. Are you going to charge them more rent because of the animal? No, you're going to treat them just like everybody else. You're going to make accommodation for the animal. And if the animal causes damage to your property, can you take it out of security deposit? Yeah, clearly you can. Clearly you can. Having the animal doesn't give them extra rights beyond what their need is. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. Handicap and condition, we have that one in the books. Clearly important today. The exemptions to the Federal Fair Housing Act. Now let me remind you, this is interesting about this chapter. People say, well, golly, if this stuff is so important, why would it have any exemptions? I don't know. I wasn't there at the time they created the law. But you do know that almost every law has some exemptions to it, right? So I want you to concentrate, knowing the prohibitions are the same for federal and state, knowing that the protected classes are the same federal and state. Concentrate on the major of these exemptions, and you're probably going to be okay. And here comes the major exemption. The for sale by owner. For sale by owner meaning they did not use the services of a what? Real estate agent. And by the way, for sale by owner or for rent by owner as well. Did not use the services of a real estate agent. And then look at the other bullet point. They could not have used discriminatory advertising as well. Did I say they could not use any advertising? I said they couldn't use what type of advertising? Discriminatory advertising. A for sale by owner is exempt from prosecution under the Federal Fair Housing Act if they do not use a real estate agent, do not use any discriminatory ads, and they own no more than 3 units total. Is that up there? It should be.
3 units of premium.
They can't own more than 3 houses total. Okay? The for sale by owner. Okay? For sale or for rent by owner, they lose their exemption. Now think about it, Victor. Go back to the very first slide. We're trying not to limit the market of properties available. This person only owns 1, 2, or 3 units. How bad can they really hurt the market? You know, and so if anybody with 4 or more, we consider them to be a professional. But if you're 3 or less, you're going to fall under this particular category. The for sale by owner, who did not use discriminatory advertising, can discriminate and not be prosecuted under this act. What would it look like? I'm out walking my dog one day in the neighborhood. I just happen to be renting in the neighborhood, but I see a for sale by owner sign. And so I go and I knock on their door. And I say, man, I would love to buy your house. Can you tell me more? They take one look at me and they say, you red-headed Irish Catholic? And I say, yeah. And he said, sorry, we don't sell to your type. He slams the door in my face. Is that offensive? Is it a violation of this act? No, it is not. Did he use discriminatory advertising? No. Did he use any advertising? Yeah, he had a sign on his yard that said for sale by owner, but it didn't discriminate. Could he have run an ad that said no red-headed white Irish people? Okay, no, he could not have done that because that would have been a discriminatory advertising. He would have lost his exemption by doing this. Yes?
But that is still a choice as a landlord, correct? You can say, I'm not going to have animals, period. I mean, it's not an exemption, federal fair housing, and I mean, even if you have a rental company that does it, you
Yeah.
just say, I don't do animals, you can't just say, oh, well, federal fair housing says that you have to let,
No.
you know.
Pets is not
Absolutely a
protected.
personal choice.
That's correct.
Okay.
But remember, this guy discriminated not for my little doggy, but he discriminated because I'm red-headed, white, and Irish Catholic. Okay? We got at least 2 classes of protection in there. Okay? All right. Now, the for sale by owner. Notice if he actually owns a quad. Do you know what a quad is? A quad is a 4-unit apartment building. A triplex would be a 3. A duplex would be a 2. Your extension actually extends to 4 units if you live in one of the units. Again, doesn't make him not a bigot. It just means that he has an exemption under this particular act. Focus on that exemption. Let me talk to you about what some of the other exemptions are, even though I don't think they're quite as important, to be honest with you. Listen to this one. Religious organizations are exempt from prosecution under this act. Man, you got to jump through a lot of hoops to get here, though. Here's why. First of all, you have to assume that the religious organization had housing. Most religious organizations do not. But first of all, you'd have to assume that they did have housing. Secondly, you would have to assume that it was for non-commercial purposes. If it was used to make money, then this would not apply. So basically, we're talking about a religious organization that has housing basically for whom? I mean, why would a religious organization have housing? Is it for the clergy, right? Missionaries, possibly. Somebody had brought up in the last class, I never thought about it before, but like a monastery, you know, I guess that would fall under this class as well. Maybe they have housing for people that are down on their luck. I don't know. All right? But here's the exemption that the religious organization has. They can restrict it to just their members. If you're one of our members, you can use our housing. So basically, who can they discriminate against? Other what? Other religions. Other religions. As long as they make their religion open to everyone. If you're willing to be one of us, then you can use our housing. But they couldn't discriminate on the other 6 classes. Does that kind of make sense to you when you think about it? Yeah. Private clubs actually have the same exemption. Private clubs, but remember the hoops you have to jump through. First of all, a private club would have to have housing. They would have to use it for non-commercial purposes. If they use it for making money, this doesn't apply. Basically, private clubs could limit the use of their housing to just their what? members, but they'd have to throw membership open to whom? Everyone. They couldn't discriminate on their membership. Technically, private clubs discriminate against me. I'm kind of offended about it, but here's why they discriminate against me. Private clubs typically discriminate based on what? Lucro. And I have none. I have no money. And so but socioeconomics is not a protected class, is it? Okay. So they can say our members only use our house and the membership is thrown over to anyone who financially qualifies. Right? And then I didn't make it on this list, but I want you to add it to this list. Elderly housing is also exempt. I told you that words had specific meanings in this class. When I say elderly housing, I want you to understand that this is not just a bunch of old codgers living near each other, okay? This is specifically defined by law. You've heard of 55 and older neighborhoods. They actually also have 62 and older neighborhoods. So these are specifically set up under law, okay? And who can they discriminate against? Elderly housing, who can they discriminate against, really? Did everybody say familial status? Familial status, yeah. And so basically, they would have to throw it open to everyone else, but familial status, they would get a little bit of a pass in that. Do you know that there's a road in Raleigh? Let's see who in here speaks French better than I do. If any of you speak any French, you all speak French better than I do. But the name of this road is Rue Sans Famille. What does that mean, Ann?
Rue Sans Famille means road without families.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rue Sans Famille. Means road without families. Road without families. Do you remember when familial status came about as a protected class? 1988. 1988 is when familial status. The Rue Sans Famille was actually created back in the 70s. And basically, they didn't create it as what we would consider elderly housing today. They just basically said, we don't want any kids around here. So that's kind of what their goal was. Clearly today, they obviously have to sell to families with children if they're so interested in that area. Or taking the created, you know, when I talk about 55 and older, I'm talking about like Del Webb communities. Do you ever see these advertised and you wonder how they can advertise to active adults? That's basically why they're doing it under an exemption under this act. Okay? What do I want you to remember about this? The exemptions to federal fair housing, I want you to understand that for sale by owner. But understand, if they use discriminatory advertising, they lose their right to this exemption. If they use a real estate agent, well, first of all, if they use a real estate agent, they're not for sale by owner. Okay? So they would lose that exemption as well. You feel okay about that? And then there's the housing for elderly. I didn't realize that it would come up on the next slide there. But it's 55 and older, 62 and older. You're not going to be beat up too badly on that beyond what you see on that slide. Okay, we have the federal act. Let's talk about what's going to happen to you for violations of this act. Let's see how I want to handle this. I want you to make a note beside this note right here. I usually like to think of three things in regards to enforcement. What's going to happen to you if someone files a fair housing complaint against you? What's going to happen? Well, first of all, it has to be investigated within 1 year of the complaint. So if it's a legitimate complaint, there will be an investigation. I'm not saying you're going to lose. I'm just saying there will be an investigation. Now, just because there's an investigation doesn't mean that there's going to be a problem. It could be completely dismissed. We see no fair housing violation here. Live to fight another day. If there is a violation, it usually the discipline falls into one of three categories. One is what we call voluntary conciliation. I don't think these words are up there, so write these on the in your notes. Enforcement, first is voluntary conciliation. Do you recognize that basically what that means is, do you know what you did wrong? Don't do it again. Here's some brochures and some information. Go and learn. Okay? Voluntary conciliation. You're not a bad person. You made a mistake. Let me give you an example. Now, I'm going to give you an example out of Atlanta, Georgia. But remember, it's okay because we're talking about federal law, right? So in Atlanta, Georgia, there was this apartment community. When I say apartment community, they actually had several communities throughout Atlanta. They ran a series of billboards throughout the Atlanta area. And on these series of billboards, they had the same family It was a white couple, white kid, and basically they're, you know, whatever they do on signs, looking up and smiling at how great it is to live in this community. So this is the same artwork that they use on all 9 billboards throughout Atlanta. Okay? Do you see a problem? The ad shows no what? Diversity. The ad shows no diversity. If I remember correctly, it also did not have the equal housing logo. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think it had the equal housing logo. Someone filed a complaint. Okay? It was investigated. So the people that own the community, the representatives of the people that own the community, they say, listen, we have nothing to hide. Come to any of our properties. You can shop our properties. You can go meet our tenants, whatever. We have nothing to hide. We believe we are at least as diverse as the area in general. Come on. When they were investigated, they found out that was true. I mean, there were no diversity issues here on site. But they still have a problem. They still have those billboards. So even though they were not fined, they didn't have to change those billboards. Okay, so was there a cost? Yes. Was there a fine? No, not really. Voluntary conciliation. You know what you did wrong, fix it, live to fight another day. Okay? Let me ask you this. Do you think this case would have prevailed if it had been one billboard? It's hard to show diversity with one billboard, right? Why do you think this company used the same models and artwork for every billboard? I suspect it was cheaper. I suspect it was cheaper. And so what they learned was a valuable lesson. Use diversity in your advertising. Put the equal housing logo on there. I was teaching a class recently and someone said, well, it's a law. Well, agents, if you print your business cards, if you print your signs, blah, 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 it's a law. You have to have the equal housing logo on there. No, it's not. That's not that. There's guidance from HUD that says you probably should, whenever possible, enter that in there. But sometimes it's not practical depending on what forum that you're in. But it's not a law. However, here's the reason I recommend that you use it more often than not. If you're ever investigated for a fair housing violation, one of the things they're going to look at is your marketing. Did you use the equal housing opportunity logos? If not, you already have strike 1 against you. Okay? Strike 2 is that there was a complaint. You better hope there's not a strike 3, because you could be in some serious jeopardy if that's the case. There's no law that requires you to use the equal housing opportunity in most occasions. I'd recommend, if possible, that you include it. Okay? Enforcement of the federal right. We only have a few questions to ask you here. Oh, I'm sorry. I only got past one. Voluntary conciliation. Would you like to know the other 2 that I think of? The second one would be, your case could be brought in front of an administrative law judge, ALJ, administrative law judge. Usually this is a 3-judge panel. They listen to your case. They can actually mete out fines. Administrative law judges can actually give you fines anywhere from $5,000 to about $25,000. I mean, these can add up. Most of my students, I'm not super concerned about this. I mean, we're talking about egregious acts, possibly egregious acts over a period of time, more than one, right? And then finally, here's the third one. The Department of Justice can get involved. If you're guilty of a federal fair housing violation, the Department of Justice could get involved to vindicate a public interest. If the Department of Justice shows up at your doorstep and says, we're here to vindicate a public interest, you should likely run. This is a case you are not big enough to win if they are there to vindicate a public interest. So what do I think of? Voluntary conciliation, you could be fined. DOJ could put you out of business. Okay. North Carolina Fair Housing Act. Here's some good news. Ready? The prohibition, same as federal law, right? 7 protected classes, same as federal law, right? So let's focus on the exemptions. Do you think this first one might be a great place for us to ask a question? There is no exemption under the State Act for a for sale by owner. Was there in the Federal Act? Is there in the State Act? No. There is no exemption for the for sale by owner. You remember that guy who slammed the door in my face earlier? Oh, you can go believe. I'm knocking again. I'm knocking again. He opens up the door and says, listen, I told you to go away once, you can't come after me under the Federal Fair Housing Act. I was in a real estate class recently and they told me that for sale by owners are exempt. So I said, well, you didn't stay long enough. If you'd stayed long enough, you would have learned that under the state act, that I can come after you even if you're a for sale by owner. If it makes you feel better to get sued in state court than federal court, fine, I'm coming after you. No exemption for the for sale by owner. Got it? Now this is weird. Would you agree that the state act is much more severe on the for sale by owner than the federal act was?
Yeah.
Clearly. But weirdly enough, when you come to an owner occupant of a quad, you remember that rule? Under the federal act, it said the owner occupant of a quad could be exempt if they leased out the other 3 units. In North Carolina, not just an owner occupant, it could be a family member. If a family member of the owner of the property lived in one of the units, they can discriminate in the other 3. So in other words, it's weird to me that it can be more severe under the state act is more severe under for sale by owner, but more lenient on the owner or family member occupant of the property. Now, I don't think you need to commit this to long-term memory. I just think it's interesting the way that laws are made. And I grew up in North Carolina, so I can actually see how this happened. I can see how this happened. Probably one day, as this was going through the legislature in North Carolina, there was some Eastern North Carolina legislator who said something like this. He said, well, let me get this straight. My daughter and I, we just bought a property in Greenville, North Carolina. She goes to East Carolina University. We bought her a quad. She's going to live in one of the units. Ain't no way in hell she's renting a home. Boys. Ain't no way in the world she's renting to boys, okay? And so in North Carolina, they actually ended up being a little more lenient. Not just the owner, but a family member of the owner. If they live in one unit, they can discriminate in the, okay? The exemptions, boom, boom, boom. And then clearly, the rental rooms and single-sex dormitories has been exempt in North Carolina. There's never been a challenge to it. Technically, I guess there could be, because what's the rule? Anytime that there's a conflict between 2 laws, which one always rules? The most restrictive is the one that always rules if necessary. And then instead of going to HUD, if it's happening in North Carolina, just simply go straight to the North Carolina Human Relations Commission for enforcement. The enforcement's going to be very similar. To be quite honest with you, if there was a federal violation, most of the time they would probably just go to the North Carolina Human Relations Commission as well. And the reason is North Carolina has what we refer to as HUD equivalence. So you're probably dealing with someone locally rather than having to deal with HUD itself. In North Carolina, you just start with the Human Relations Commission. They're fun to talk to. Give a call sometime if you have a question. It's interesting what you can learn. Okay, I'm through with that little section. Prohibitions, protected classes, exemptions. Boom, move on. Go back and look at your midterm questions when you get a chance and look how closely they were written in regards to these. Okay? Questions, comments so far? All right, here's some, look at this. All of these words are in red, which means you're probably going to get tested on these words. Historically, this has been a great place for us to ask test questions. Fair housing vocabulary. In every chapter we have vocabulary. What page did it say we're on? 525 through 527. Melissa, you're kind of in the center of the room there. So I want you to turn to the section on block busting. Do you see the section on block busting? Do you see the first sentence or 2 on block busting? Does everybody see where she is? Melissa is going to read this out loud for us. And basically what I'm telling you is this definition is as good as any I can come up with. So Melissa, go. Block busting.
Okay, block busting, also known as panic peddling, is the act of encouraging people to sell or rent their homes by claiming that the entry of a protected class into the neighborhood will have some negative impact on property value.
Perfect. That is absolutely perfect and as succinct as we need to be on that. Panic peddling, panic selling is block busting. And so an agent is going around basically saying something like this. And let's not be naive. Historically, this was based on race. Contemporarily, it may have more to do with national origin, maybe even religion today. I don't know. But basically, what an agent is doing is they're going to people that live in that neighborhood and saying, hey, you know, if beep moved in down the street, you better sell now. You know what's going to happen to property values, right? What's the agent doing? Other than violating fair housing. They're trying to create a panic based on the entry of a protected class to get you to sell your property. Do you recognize blockbusting? Okay, without even a segue, let's go, Melissa, keep going. I'm sorry, are you right? I can get someone else.
Okay.
Look at steering, look at steering.
Steering is the channeling of home seekers to particular neighborhoods based on the presence or absence of a protected class.
Okay, now, I like steering because it is very visual. You can see exactly what's going on. Steering or channeling, they sometimes use that word as well. I'm taking you over to this particular area. Why? Well, because I thought, listen, let me tell you how you know that you're going to real estate jail. Here's how you know you're going to real estate jail. Well, I thought you'd want to live around others like yourself. Okay? Man, if you do that, it's clear that you are steering them to certain areas because of them, okay? And I gotta be honest with you, not only should you do it proactively, you actually have to be careful about people asking you to do this. As an agent, you should not, you know what, if someone says they want to live in Windward Downs, I'm going to show them property in Windward Downs. If they say they want to live where all the white people are at, then we got a bigger problem, okay? Now they're asking me to, and you say, well, they're the ones asking, how's that a violation? It's not for them to ask, it's for me to respond to that, okay? So you actually have to be a little bit careful with steering. It's another one of those, there are versions of this that are a little more, than I get people from New York all the time that don't ask me the question, well, how do you end up with these boroughs that have the same ethnicity in them? My answer is, I hope it didn't end up that way because of real estate agents, okay? Now, if someone comes and they say, I want to live in this particular borough, obviously you show them properties in that. If they say, I want to live there because I want to be away from such and such, that brings up a whole different issue, okay?
So, for example, if you were asked, you would say, what do you answer?
Well, now it depends. It depends. Now keep in mind that question about familial status, I really don't get too mad at that type of question. I educate, I tell them what my answers will be, and I want to move on. But I actually had an agent a few years back, and he listened to this. He picked up somebody at the airport. You know, this is someone that's like executive level, okay? This is someone that's going to spend $1 million on a house. So the agent picks him up. He's riding him around. He hears a couple of things that maybe sound a little bit off color, but you know, not major yet because he's just getting to know the guy. Could be a difference of whatever. But eventually the guy tells him, he says, well, make sure you show me areas where there's not a lot of black people. Okay, I mean, he actually said this to the agent, and the agent turned around, took him back to the airport, and dropped him off. He said, you're going to need another agent. I'm not going to work with that. And that's exactly what that agent did. That was so blatant that the agent could have done nothing else. The guy actually complained. He actually complained to the company. You just lost $1 million sale, whatever your commission on that was going to be. Well, by the time the guy complained to the broker in charge, the agent had obviously already had a conversation with the broker in charge, so he was expecting it at that point. And the broker in charge backed up the agent and said, we don't want your business. We don't want your business. Okay? So it's rare that that happens. But if you know that someone's asking you that blatantly, walk away. Walk away. Do you remember what I said earlier? You will obey the lawful and ethical requests of your clients. Once you know that someone's going to ask you to do something that is unethical and unlawful, you got to sever that relationship. And no one will blame you. Advertising. I actually like advertising as a test question. And the reason that I like advertising as a test question is I love it when chapters mingle. So in regards to fair housing, you know, we could run an ad